Hi guys. Chapter 2 has published, so I'm going to go ahead and read chapter 4. Because, is that right? Chapter 4? Yeah. Because Granddaddy's already done chapter 3. So, our Bible question for today is God really interested in my problems? Picture yourself as a first grader sitting at the kitchen table working on a word list. The words aren't much harder than ball and dog, but you're having a hard time with them. Then your older sister comes over and says, I can help you with that. Your sister is a big help because she had to do this when she was in first grade too. And she knows more than you know. God is like that, only of course way, way better, because God sent his son Jesus to earth to live as a human being. You can trust that God understands everything that bothers you. He wants to help you with your problems, and he has the power to do it. People trust God all the time. Tell him all your problems because God is our protection. That's Psalm 62, verse 8. Okay, chapter 4, Treasures in the Snow. The quarrel begins. Lucian lay under his large feather duvet and wished that it wasn't time to get up. His bed was so warm and the air outside was so cold. He sighed and cuddled down again under the bedclothes. Lucian! His mother's voice sounded really angry, and Lucian jumped up in a hurry. This was the third time she had called him, and he had pretended not to hear. He could still get up and be in time for school, although he would not have time to do the milking. But after all, if he didn't do the milking, his mother would have to, and these days he did it more often than not. She did it more often than not, Other boys don't have to milk before they go to school, muttered Lucian as he buttoned his jacket. I don't see why I should always have to work harder than everybody else just because I don't happen to have a father. He went downstairs looking sulky and defiant, and he sat down to gobble up his bread and coffee. His mother came in from the stable when he was halfway through. Lucian, she said sharply, why don't you get up when I call you? It happens day after day. You're not any help to me in the mornings at all. He needs a little panking, I think. Your sister gets up early enough and goes off to work without any fuss. I know other boys have fathers, but we only have 3 cows and we can't live without them. You're a big, strong boy now, and it's shameful that you should leave all the early work to me like this. Lucian scowled. I work at night, he whined. I never get to play. I have to fetch in the wood, and I have farther up the hill to come than any of the others, and I fetch down the fodder for you and clean the shed on Saturdays. His mother sniffed. I've usually done most of it by the time you get home from school, she said. I know you don't get as much time in winter as other children do, but I do all I can, and this early morning milking is wearing me out. You're quite old enough to do it now, and in the future you're to get up properly. Now hurry off or you'll be late for school. Lucian struggled into his coat and turned away with a sulky goodbye. He unhitched the sled and went whizzing away into the frosty dark. Except for the smooth sound of the sled runners, the world was quite silent, as if it was holding its breath before the coming of dawn. Usually Lucian felt in awe of the greatness of it, but today he was just too angry to think about it. It's so unfair, he muttered. Everybody's against me. It's not my fault. I don't get my lessons done properly. Oh, it's not my fault I don't get my lessons done properly. I'm always having to work at home. It's reading today, and I suppose I shall be bottom again, and that show-off Annette Bernier will be on top. I bet she doesn't have to milk cows before school. Oh. He tried to stop, but it was too late. He had reached the fork in the path, and he had been so busy feeling cross and sorry for himself that he hadn't looked where he was going. He had bumped straight into Annette's sled sideways and sent her right into the ditch. It was careless sledding, and Lucian, crimson, that's red in the face and truly upset, jumped off his sled to help her, but Annette was before him. She had never liked Lucian much, and she was badly shaken. She turned on him, waist deep in snow, her eyes blazing. You great clumsy donkey, she shouted, half crying. Can't you look where you're going? Look at my book. All my work is smudged and torn. I'm going to tell the master it's all your fault." Lucian, who was never good at keeping his temper, lost it at once. "All right," he shouted back. "There's no need to make such a fuss. I didn't do it on purpose. Anybody would think I'd killed you instead of tearing your old exercise book. It won't hurt you to lose your marks. I'm going on." He jumped onto his sled and whizzed away, arriving just in time for school. Inside, though, he felt really bad about it, but his manners were never very good at the best of times, and he tried not to think of what he had done. "She's only got to get out," he muttered, "and I don't suppose she would have let me help her in any case anyway. Thank goodness I'm in time for school. I've been late twice this week already." But getting out of that snowdrift was a very different matter from getting in, and poor Annette had quite a struggle. By the time she had managed to get herself out of the snowdrift and collect all her books, she was really crying with cold and shock and sore knees, and most of all crying with rage. When she crept into school a quarter of an hour later, her eyes were red and her nose was blue and her poor hands raw. Knees were grazed and bleeding. With her torn, wet books, she looked a sorry sight. "Annette," said the master, quite concerned, "what has happened to you, my child?" For a few seconds, Annette fought hard with the temptation to tell tales, but the sight of Lucian sitting so smug and safe in his desk was too much for her. "It was Lucian," she burst out angrily. "He knocked me into a ditch and then went off and left me. I couldn't get out." She stuffed her knuckles into her eyes and began crying again. She was really very badly shaken and oh, so angry. The class all felt sorry for her and angry with Lucian, who hung his head and looked very sullen indeed. The master caned Lucian for behaving in such an unkind way. That means he got quite a spanking, which cheered Annette up and made her feel much better. Later, when the marks were read out, Annette came out on top and felt better still. Lucian came out on bottom and was told to stay in and do extra work after school. So he sat through morning school and lunchtime with the others and came back to afternoon school and sat on alone when all the others had gone. All the time the rage and hatred and bad temper in his heart were getting bigger and bigger till he felt as if he was going to burst. At last he was let out from school and wandered up the hill, dragging his sled behind him. What a terrible day it had been. His mother had been cross with him. Annette had told tales about him. The master had caned him, and he had come out on bottom. Was ever a boy so badly treated? I think Lucian's biggest enemy is Lucian. The shadows on the fields were strangely blue that night. High up, the mountain tops were still sunlit, with ragged wisps of cloud trailing about them. The quietness of the mountains seemed to hold out its arms to Lucian. Children and nature are very close together, and often nature's silence can do more to heal angry, unhappy children than any human words can. So, as he trudged up the hill, Lucian's rage began to change to a sort of weary misery. Thinking he was alone, he stuffed his knuckles into his eyes and he began to cry a little. Then suddenly he discovered that he wasn't alone. He was again at the place where the path divided, and there was a little boy standing in the snow looking up at him in great astonishment. A happy, rosy-cheeked, bright-eyed little boy. His fair hair stuck out like a thatch from under his woolly cap, his face glowing with good health and good humor. It was Danny making a snowman. He had just put on the head and was arranging the eyes. It was the best snowman Danny had ever made, and he was just about to fetch Annette to look at it. "Why are you crying?" asked Danny. "I'm not crying," retorted Lucian angrily. "Oh, yes you are," replied Danny, "and I know why. It's because the master caned you. Annette told us. He didn't mean to be cruel, for he was usually a kind little boy. But Lucian had been nasty to Annette, and that, to Danny, was quite unforgivable." Lucian's temper flared up instantly, and lifting his foot, he kicked Danny's snowman into little bits. Danny lifted up his voice and gave a loud howl of alarm and disappointment. Annette, crossing from the shed, saw what was happening in an instant. She flew down the path like a young tigress and slapped Lucian full in the face. Lucian lifted his hand to hit her back, but the sight of Monsieur Bernier coming out of the chalet with a bucket made him think better of it. Everything was clearly against him. "Sneak, telltale, coward," shouted Lucian. "Baby coming into school crying like that." "You're a great rough bully," shouted back Annette, "leaving me in the ditch like that, and then kicking poor Danny Snowman. He never did you any harm. Why can't you leave him alone? I'm jolly glad you were caned. Come on, Danny, come home." She marched angrily off up the path with Danny trotting behind her. At the door of the chalet, she turned and noticed a patch of pink sky behind the far mountains. Once Grandmother had taught her a text from the Bible which said, "Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry." She suddenly thought about that scripture now. Well, there was still time. Lucian was still there. After all, it was nasty of her to have told tales. She hesitated. But he'd been much worse than she had. It was up to him to say he was sorry. If she asked him to forgive her, it would seem like she was to blame. And of course she wasn't to blame. Oh, no, not in the least. She went in and slammed the door behind her. Lucian went slowly home with his face stinging from that slap, more furious than he had been all day long. But as he walked, he glanced up and noticed a wonderful thing. The clouds had come up in a purple bank, blotting out the mountain behind his home, but just in one spot they had broken, and in that gap Lucian could see the snowy crest, radiant with golden light. He was used to winter sunsets, but the beauty of this one made Lucian catch his breath and look again. The pure, high radiance suddenly made his anger seem a poor, small thing, not worth hanging on to. How nice it would be to start again. There was still time to catch a gnat if he ran. But no, Annette was a show-off and would probably take no notice of him. And anyhow, why should he apologize to a girl? So, because neither would be the first to forgive, the quarrel began. This quarrel was going to last for a very long time, and it was going to bring with it a great deal of unhappiness for both of them. As Lucian stood there thinking, a cloud blew across the gap, and the radiant mountaintop was again hidden from view. The end of chapter 4. And next time I'll be reading chapter 5, which is the accident. Something bad is going to happen. Bye for now.